Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
It was the day before Thanksgiving when Mom called, as usual with her list of demands. No homemade mess this year, she said. Store-bought rolls only. The kind that come in a bag, perfectly uniform and unimpressive. I could almost hear her eyes roll as she said it, even over the phone. Darren, my brother, was bringing some new investor to dinner. Not just a regular guest, an important one. So I needed to dress presentably, she insisted, like I wasn't already planning on it. I grabbed a plain dark sweater and some khakis. Nothing too fancy, nothing too casual. I knew what they expected. This wasn't the first time. I tried not to care, even though I was already bracing for another night of feeling like the screw-up. My brother, the architect, the golden child, would be in his element, of course, and I was the guy who ran a landscaping supply company, but somehow still couldn't manage to meet their ridiculous standards. Before hanging up, I checked in on something. Hey, the payment to the account ending in 2187 went through, right? I asked, trying to keep it casual. Of course it did, she said, sounding a little defensive, like it was some sort of imposition. But I knew. The payment had cleared, just like it always had. 3 years of quiet support. No thanks. No acknowledgement. Just silent payments that had kept their house standing. I hung up, grabbed the rolls from the bakery, and mentally prepared for another night of invisible labor. I arrived at their house right on time, as usual. The remodeled place looked the same as always, bigger, flashier, more polished, but I could tell from the outside it had that new money shine. I'd helped keep it all standing, but somehow, I was never really part of what made it work. Dad was in the front hall when I walked in, wearing his usual grin that didn't quite meet his eyes. Well, look who's here, our little freelancer, he said with that sarcastic bite, his voice thick with judgment wrapped in a smile. I nodded because what else could I do? My freelancer job, the one he couldn't wrap his head around, was how I paid for all the stuff they couldn't seem to keep track of, like the mortgage. But Dad wouldn't ever see that. He had his own ways of looking at the world. Darren, the golden child, stood by the door in his perfectly tailored suit, looking way too comfortable. He gave me a smile that felt more like a polite obligation than real warmth. Hey, good to see you, he said, holding out his hand, like we didn't just see each other last week. He was already standing there with Mr. Halbert, the investor, who was dressed in a dark blue blazer that probably cost more than the whole truckload of mulch I delivered this week. Mr. Halbert, Darren said, this is my brother Sam. He's in landscaping. Mr. Halbert barely looked at me as he shook my hand. His grip was cold and limp, the kind of handshake that came from a guy who had better things to do than listen to what I had to say. I couldn't blame him. To someone like him, I was just a guy who carried bags of dirt for a living. He didn't hide it either. His eyes flicked down to my jeans, probably wondering what exactly I was doing here. Landscaping, huh? He said, barely masking his disinterest. Yeah, I said, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. Landscaping. Darren looked at me, probably expecting me to say something more impressive, but he didn't push it. He didn't care. He had his shiny new investor, and I was just a side note in the picture of his perfect life. Inside, Mom was already directing traffic, making sure the table was set and everything was just so. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Put the rolls on the sideboard, she said, her voice crisp, like it was more of an order than a request. The good plates are for important guests. I nodded and carried the rolls over to the counter, like I was invisible. Mom always had a way of making sure I stayed in the background, especially when there were guests. It was like I wasn't really part of the family at all, just a helper for when things got complicated. The conversation around the table was already in full swing when I sat down. Darren's wife, Jennifer, was bragging about their kids, how both of them had gotten into these elite music conservatory auditions, how they were basically prodigies. She kept talking, and I could tell it was one of those moments where she needed everyone to acknowledge how special her kids were. I made small talk when I had to, nodding when people asked about work or life, pretending to care. I didn't let it show, but inside, it felt like I was shrinking. Mom made sure I didn't sit too close to anyone important, though. She made sure Darren's special guests got the good seats and the good food. So I sat in my corner, hands folded, mind focused on the plates in front of me, trying not to think too hard about how they saw me. It was fine. It wasn't the first time I'd been treated this way. It wouldn't be the last. So I kept my head down and stayed out of the way. I wasn't going to rock the boat tonight. Not yet. By the time dessert rolled around, the room was warm with wine and false cheer. Mom was pouring herself another glass of something red and fancy, looking pleased with herself. The dinner was winding down, and the guests were scattering into different rooms, but it didn't take long before the conversation turned to familiar territory. Me. Sam, I really don't know how you manage it, Mom said, her voice pitched higher than usual, like she was about to make an announcement. She looked at me over the top of her wine glass, her lips pressed tight. I mean, it's hard enough raising a daughter who still can't afford rent. Can you imagine, at your age? Her words hit the air like a slap. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like this, but tonight, after too much wine, it felt sharper. Her tone had that layer of forced sympathy, the kind that people use when they're uncomfortable with their own judgments, but don't know how to hide them. Her gaze darted between me and Darren, like she was waiting for him to chime in and save her from saying more. Dad, who had been contentedly nodding along to his own half-empty plate, finally looked up from his phone. He set it down slowly, like he was weighing his next words. Yeah, he said, his voice calm. It's a little worrying, you know. At your age, Sam, most people have a career or something solid, something stable. I could feel his eyes on me, the disapproval dripping from his words, like it was supposed to be a secret, but everyone knew. He cleared his throat before continuing. Maybe Darren could help you out. I mean, his firm's been expanding. He might be able to get you a spot. You could get some real work, a steady paycheck. I clenched my jaw and kept my gaze steady, willing myself not to snap. Darren didn't meet my eyes. He shifted in his chair, a slight grimace tugging at his lips. He was avoiding the conversation just as much as I was, but I knew it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he'd always known how Mom and Dad felt about me and my freelance life. He just never bothered to correct them. Oh, it's not like that, Mom said quickly, her voice pitched up again, desperate to cover up how much she meant what she just said. We're just worried about you. You're doing fine, Sam, but you could do more. You could have a better life if you just tried a little harder, you know. The words stung, but I didn't react. Not yet. I just looked down at the crumbs on my plate, trying to focus on something else. Anything else. But it didn't matter. They'd already drawn the line. Darren was the one who had done it right, and I was the one who had failed. I stayed silent, letting the weight of their words settle between us. It was too much, but I wasn't going to let them see that it bothered me. Not anymore. Yeah, maybe, I said quietly, keeping my tone even, almost too calm. Mom smiled at my response like she'd won. I'm just glad you understand. It's not that we want to control you, Sam. It's just... I understand, I interrupted her, maybe too quickly, but I needed them to believe I was taking this in stride. I get it, really. Dad let out a low, satisfied hum and picked up his glass, as if that little exchange had solved something. I was just the problem they had to fix, but now they thought I was getting it. It was the same old script, and I was playing my part perfectly. Mom seemed content with the conversation, turning to Darren to ask about his latest project, but I felt it, deep in my chest, the disgust of being reduced to nothing more than a project. I was a problem to be solved, and they were so sure they were right. In their minds, I was the one who needed fixing, not them, not the things they kept swept under the rug. I stayed for the rest of the dessert, nodding and smiling when needed, but inside, I was burning. The kind of burning that makes you realize how far gone you are. How much effort I'd put into pretending things didn't sting, when they always had. When the last guest left, I didn't say goodbye. I just grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, my back straight, but my skin tight, like I was going to break at any second. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I needed the space, the breath, the distance, and I needed the clarity. It wasn't just about them. It wasn't just about me. It was about something else I hadn't put together until tonight. They didn't see me at all. They saw their idea of what I should be, and no matter how much I proved myself, I was never going to fit their mold. I wasn't enough for them, no matter what I did, and I was done. I drove home in silence, my mind running on a loop, but this time I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just clearer than I'd ever been. The next morning, I woke up with the tight knot of last night still sitting in my stomach. I didn't need to think about it long. I knew what I had to do. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank account, my fingers moving quickly, like I'd done this 100 times. Because I had. For 3 years, I'd been sending them $4,600 every month, quietly, without a word. They didn't know where it came from. They never questioned it. I set it up through a generic business account, so they'd never make the connection. Dad had retired early, and Mom's spending had spiraled out of control. I didn't mind helping at first. It felt like the right thing to do, keeping the house afloat, making sure they didn't lose everything. But over time, it became less about helping and more about being their invisible safety net. They never asked, never thanked me. And now, after last night, I realized I was just the fallback, the one who'd always fix things when they fell apart. But I wasn't their solution anymore. I hovered over the screen, my finger itching to click. It was like a weight had been lifted the second I hit cancel. Done. The payments would stop. No more hiding behind this mask of responsibility, pretending that I was okay with being treated like a failure. It was time for them to sink or swim on their own. As I sat back, a buzz from my phone interrupted the quiet. Business updates, new contracts, big numbers. I read through them with a smile creeping across my face. Another big landscaping job. Another one after that. More money coming in. It should have felt strange, right? Like I was pulling the rug out from under my parents, but it didn't. It felt right. The weight that had been pressing down on me for years finally started to lift. This was the first time in ages that I didn't feel like I was holding onto someone else's burden. I set the phone down and stretched, feeling my body relax into the chair. I had work to do, and now I could do it on my own terms. I could grow. I could expand my company. I could finally stop being the fallback, stop being their excuse for why they didn't have to deal with their own mess. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about being free. And right then, with my phone buzzing with updates and the rest of the world still out there waiting, I finally understood. I wasn't the problem anymore. I wasn't the disappointment. They were, and I wasn't going to keep carrying them. By lunchtime, I'd nearly forgotten about the cancellation. I was in the middle of reviewing some contracts when my phone buzzed again. It was Mom. I answered without thinking. Hey, what's up? Her voice was thin, frantic. Sam, I don't know what's going on. The mortgage company just called. They say the automatic payment didn't go through. I glanced at the clock, letting the silence drag for a beat. Really? I said, playing dumb. That's strange. Maybe you should call them. No, she said quickly, her voice rising. They said it's canceled. We didn't even set up autopay. Sam, do you know anything about this? I leaned back in my chair, breathing in slowly. Her words felt like a slow punch to the gut, and I couldn't help but let a small smile creep onto my face. Not because I was happy they were in trouble, but because this moment, this realization, had been coming for years. I could hear Dad yelling in the background, the sound of his frustration bleeding through the phone. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. He was likely blaming her for not keeping track, like he always did when things went wrong. What's going on, Donna? I could hear him demanding, his voice thick with panic. Mom took a deep breath, then lowered her tone, like she was afraid of what she was about to ask. Sam, the payments, they've been coming from a business account for 3 years. Do you know anything about that? I felt the weight of the question settle into my chest, but I kept my voice even. Maybe you should start thinking about how to handle it going forward, I said, as casually as I could. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, slow and shallow, like she was trying to piece something together. I stayed silent, letting the words hang in the air, the silence growing thick and uncomfortable. She exhaled slowly. You've been doing this. For 3 years. Her voice cracked at the end, like she was coming to terms with something she didn't want to believe. The weight of it was hitting her now. Slowly, piece by piece, she was connecting the dots. I didn't say anything right away. There was nothing I needed to say. The truth was there, hanging between us as clear as day. I don't know, I finally said. Maybe it's time for you and Dad to figure it out on your own. Her voice softened, almost a whisper now. Sam, why didn't you tell us? We had no idea. The guilt was creeping in. I could hear it in her voice. But it wasn't for me. She was realizing finally how deep this went, how much I'd been doing behind the scenes. I didn't answer. What was there to say? That I'd been keeping them afloat while they treated me like I was nothing. That I'd been pretending to be okay with being the one who saved them when they didn't even notice. The silence stretched out, filling the space between us. Mom didn't know how to react. She'd spent all these years thinking that she was in control, that she was doing what she had to do, and now the truth was leaking out. I let it sit, let her feel the weight of it, because I wasn't going to carry it anymore. Finally, she spoke again, but her voice was small. I I don't know what to say, Sam. This is a lot. I rubbed my thumb over the edge of my phone. You'll figure it out, I said quietly. And just like that, I hung up. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty, empty, but lighter. The decision had been made. The last part of the act had dropped away, and now I was standing in the wreckage. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen of my phone. My hands felt oddly calm, like I'd just made peace with something I'd never wanted to admit. It was a kind of clarity I hadn't had before. I went back to work after a few minutes, blocking out the buzz of incoming emails, the new contracts rolling in, the next job waiting for me. But as I clicked through the numbers, there was a small part of me that couldn't stop thinking about how different it all felt, how different I felt, and how, for the first time in a long time, I was finally starting to see just how much I'd been invisible to them, how much they'd been relying on me without ever really seeing me. But that was over now. The next few days were a blur of missed calls and voicemails. I didn't pick up any of them. I wasn't in the mood to listen to them try to explain themselves, to figure out how to get out of the mess they'd found themselves in. But I did listen to the voicemails when I had a quiet moment. The first few were filled with confusion, like they thought they had somehow misunderstood what had happened. Mom's voice sounded more strained with every message. She kept saying things like, "We need to talk about the payments, Sam," and "This doesn't make any sense." The next day, the tone shifted. Guilt crept in. "Sam, we didn't know. I don't know how we didn't know," Mom said, sounding like she was trying to talk herself into believing it. Dad wasn't far behind, his voice low and tight. "We didn't mean to make you feel like this. We just didn't see it." I let their words settle in, but I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not relief, just an empty kind of calm. They dug their own hole. Now they were trying to climb out, but it wasn't my problem anymore. Then, the panic set in. "Sam, you need to tell us what happened," Mom begged in one message. "We don't know how we're going to make this work. We don't have the money to cover it. Please, please call us back." It was the desperation that got to me, the panic in her voice. But I didn't call back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. A couple more days passed before I finally answered the phone. It wasn't a conscious decision, just a moment of weakness. I'd been out at a job site, wrapping up some things for the week, and my phone buzzed with her name. I picked it up before I even thought about it. "Sam." Mom's voice was small, softer than I'd ever heard it, apologetic. I don't know what to say. "I'm sorry. We didn't realize what was going on. We didn't know how much you were doing for us." I let her words hang in the air, but I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. She had to sit in it. They both did. After a long pause, she said, "We were wrong. I was wrong. I don't know what we were thinking." I could hear the guilt in her voice, and I felt something sharp twist in my chest. Not because I cared, but because it finally hit me how long I had been invisible to them. How little they understood me, even as I kept their lives from falling apart. I kept my voice steady, controlled. "How are you paying the mortgage now?" I asked, keeping the question simple. I didn't need to make it complicated. Mom stuttered, caught off guard by the directness of it. We don't know yet. We're trying to figure something out. Maybe we can take out another loan?" "Maybe," I said, cutting her off. "What changed from yesterday? You had enough for 3 years, right?" I could hear her breath catch, like she was finally starting to realize that the rug had been pulled out from under them. "We thought we had it covered," she whispered, and I could hear the panic creeping back into her voice. "But now, we don't. Sam, we need your help. We don't know how we're going to manage." I didn't respond right away. I let her sit in it. Let the weight of what she was saying sink in. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, but I wasn't going to break it. After what felt like forever, I spoke again. "You'll figure it out. You always do." And with that, I ended the call. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't closure. It was just done. I wasn't their crutch anymore. I wasn't the one who'd quietly fix things from behind the scenes. And in that moment, I realized something. The more they tried to get me to save them, the more they pushed me away. They hadn't even seen me as a person. Not really. I was just a tool they could use. Now, I wasn't. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like freedom. It was a few hours later when my phone buzzed with Darren's name flashing on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but for some reason, I picked it up. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Sam, Darren's voice came through, tight and steady. We need to talk. I figured it out. I let out a slow breath. You figured it out? Yeah, about the payments, he continued, his voice lower now. The business account, the mortgage? I know what you've been doing. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He knew. It wasn't a surprise, but what was going to come next? I braced myself. They don't know how they're going to manage without it, he said, the words coming out in a rush. Sam, they need help. You're the only one who can afford to give it. I stared at the wall in front of me, processing what he was saying. My mind went back to Thanksgiving dinner, to the way he'd stood there with Mr. Halbert, playing the part of the golden child. The way he'd never said a word when Mom and Dad dragged me through the mud in front of everyone. Yeah, I'm sure they do, I said, my voice a little too sharp. But I'm done helping them. There was a long pause, the kind of pause that told me Darren was trying to figure out how to respond. Sam, look, I didn't know the whole story. I didn't know it was you paying all of it. I thought they were handling it themselves. I felt a sudden heat rise in my chest. You knew enough, I shot back. You knew they couldn't pay, and you didn't say a damn thing. You let me take the fall for all of it. There was a crack in Darren's voice when he spoke again, but it wasn't guilt. It was something else, something that felt like frustration with me. I didn't know you were that deep into it. I didn't know you were covering everything. You didn't say anything. I pressed my lips together, clenching my jaw. I didn't say anything because it's not your business. It's not anyone's business. I've been doing it all this time because I thought it was what was needed. But they've been treating me like crap, Darren, like I'm some kind of failure. And now they need help. They need help because they're too proud to face the mess they've made. Darren was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear him trying to come up with something that wouldn't sound like an excuse. Look, I didn't want to make it worse, all right? I didn't want to call them out in front of everyone at Thanksgiving. It's not like I didn't see it, but I didn't know how to fix it, Sam. No, you didn't want to make it worse because you didn't care enough to do anything, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. You saw me take the heat for everything, and you did nothing. You let me be the scapegoat. So don't act like you didn't know. His tone shifted, becoming more defensive. I didn't know everything. I didn't know you were paying the mortgage. Don't give me that, I cut in, my voice hard now. You knew enough. You knew they were struggling. You knew they couldn't keep the house, and you didn't care. You didn't care enough to say anything. Not to me, not to them. You just sat back and let me do all the work while you played the good son. And now you want me to bail them out again, to fix it. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Darren spoke again, his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I didn't know it was that bad. But Sam, they're freaking out. I don't know what else to tell them. Good, I said, my tone flat. Maybe it's time they learn how to live within their means, like the rest of us. They need to face the consequences of their choices. It's not my job anymore. Darren's voice was quieter now, almost resigned. You're really not going to help them. No, I said. I'm done. I ended the call without waiting for him to respond. I didn't need to hear any more excuses. I wasn't their backup anymore, and I wasn't going to be. For once, it felt like the world was settling into place, like I'd finally stopped pretending. I sat in silence for a while after, the weight of what I'd said still heavy in the air. But I didn't feel bad. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. It was time for them to face the music. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to stop being the one to catch them when they fell. After I hung up on Darren, I sat there for a while, letting the room feel empty. The tension, the constant weight of their expectations, gone. The air felt cleaner, but there was still one thing left to do. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank screen for a minute. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I knew I needed to put everything down. I had already said what needed to be said, but I hadn't made it official yet. I needed them to know the full scope of what I'd done for them and why I was done. I took a deep breath and started typing. Subject: Final statement. Mom, Dad, Darren, I've been paying the mortgage for the past 3 years. Over $165,000 total. Every month, I've sent the payment quietly from a business account that you never asked about. You never knew where the money came from, and I never said a word. I didn't want to be acknowledged. I just wanted to keep the house from falling apart. But I'm done now. I stopped the payments. It wasn't a loan, and I'm not asking for anything back. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, but now I realize it was wrong. It's wrong to keep supporting people who openly disrespect me and treat me like I'm some kind of failure. You've made it clear time and again that no matter what I do, it's never enough. You don't see me for who I am, and I can't keep pretending that I don't care. You need to figure this out on your own. I advise you to seek financial counseling. The help you need is beyond what I can give. And frankly, I'm not your safety net anymore. Good luck. Sam, I stared at the email for a moment longer, making sure every word felt right. This wasn't something I could take back. This was the final word, the end of the story. I hit send. The immediate silence felt heavier. It wasn't the calm I had imagined. It was more like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to break. My phone buzzed almost immediately, a call from Mom. I let it ring. Then Dad, another missed call. Then Darren, another. I set the phone face down on the desk and stood up. The house felt too small, too close. I walked to the window and looked out at the street, my eyes unfocused, trying to feel something. But nothing came. I was calm. Too calm, maybe. But I wasn't nervous. The moment had come. I had said what I needed to say. I wasn't going back on it. They would call again, and again, and again. I knew that. I knew the next few days would be full of desperate voicemails, of apologies, of their confusion, maybe even guilt. But I couldn't care anymore. I couldn't do it for them, couldn't carry them on my back while they lived their lives in a way that made me invisible. The weight of their expectations, their need for me, had been too much. I wasn't angry anymore, but I was done. And with that final decision, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. I turned off my phone, stepped out of the room, and went back to work. Spring came, and with it, everything started to feel different. Business was booming. I hadn't expected it, but the more I focused on my company and less on all the family chaos, the more things fell into place. New contracts rolled in faster than I could keep track of. Big clients, big money. I expanded the operation, hired a few more guys to help with deliveries, and moved into a bigger warehouse. The air smelled like fresh mulch and new opportunity. My hands were full, but for once, it wasn't with other people's problems. The calls from Mom and Dad came less frequently now, but they still came. They'd refinanced the house, managed to scrape by with some serious cutbacks. But I could tell it wasn't easy for them. The house was quieter now, less pristine than before. I imagined they were still trying to figure things out, still struggling to breathe beneath the weight of their own choices. The first call from Mom after the email was a few weeks later. She tried to sound casual, but I could tell she was holding back. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. "Hey, Sam," she said, like we hadn't just gone through the biggest mess in years. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm fine," I said. "Work's busy. Things are good." I kept it short, polite, but there was a distance now, one I couldn't hide. I didn't feel angry anymore, but I didn't feel any closer either. It was just different. "We're managing," she continued, not quite meeting my tone. "Dad's gotten some side jobs, and we cut back on a few things. The house is okay. We're getting by." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Good. Glad to hear it." The words were polite, but my heart didn't ache the way it used to. "I know you're probably busy, but I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice faltering just a little. "I don't know what we would have done without you, Sam. We never meant for things to get this way. I didn't have to say it. I didn't want to. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to fix, and she knew that now. I'd given them enough. I was no longer the one who saved them from themselves. "It's fine, Mom," I said, keeping it simple. "You'll be all right." The conversation ended awkwardly, like we were both walking on eggshells. The polite, distant small talk that came next didn't make me feel anything. Just a slight shift in the space between us, and I could tell she felt it too. They weren't my problem anymore. The pressure had been lifted, and it wasn't relief, it was just quiet. The next time Dad called, I was in the middle of a meeting. He left a voicemail, but I didn't listen to it. There was no need. I already knew what it was. Something vague, a check-in. Maybe a question about work or a half-hearted apology, but I didn't care enough to return the call. And that felt good. Occasionally, they would text, and I'd answer with the same level of politeness. But it was different now. The anger I'd carried for years had evaporated into something far less complicated: indifference. I still loved them. Of course, I did, but I didn't have to carry them anymore. Darren called once, a month or so after everything went down. He sounded a little uncomfortable, but I didn't mind. I wasn't holding on to the resentment anymore. Hey, Sam, I just wanted to check in. Everything okay with you? He asked, like he wasn't sure how to approach me now. Yeah, things are good, I said, keeping it neutral. Business is growing. Can't complain. There was a pause on his end. I know things were rough with mom and dad, but I hope you know they're trying, they're working on it. I'm trying to help too. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I know, Darren. It's fine. They'll figure it out. I'm not their solution anymore. The conversation ended quickly after that. We both knew it wasn't really a conversation anymore. The relationship had shifted. There were no more expectations from either of us. I was finally free. The warehouse was bustling, my crew was solid, and business was good. For the first time, I wasn't holding on to anyone else's dreams or failures. I was moving forward on my own terms. Boundaries didn't feel like walls anymore. They felt like freedom. I had learned to say no. I had learned to put myself first. And in doing that, I'd built something stronger than any family obligation ever could have. A future. My future. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. I smiled to myself, standing there in the middle of the warehouse, watching the guys work. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. And that was exactly what I needed. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, going through some new contracts, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then picked it up. Hello, Sam. It was Jennifer, Darren's wife. Her voice was a little hesitant, like she wasn't sure how to start. It's Jennifer. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I rubbed my eyes. No, it's fine. What's up? She paused for a moment, then said, Emma misses you. She's been asking about you a lot lately. She wants to know why you don't come to family dinners anymore. I swallowed, feeling something twist in my chest. Emma was Darren's youngest, a sweet kid who had always been the easiest part of their family for me to connect with. I didn't think anyone noticed, I said, keeping my voice light. Jennifer's tone softened. We noticed. And, Sam, I think we both finally understand what you did. Why you stepped back from everything. I was quiet for a moment, not sure what to say. Part of me expected her to defend Darren or try to justify everything that had happened. But she didn't. Instead, there was an apology in her voice. I'm sorry, Sam, she said. I'm really sorry. I think we both were blind to everything. What you were doing, what you were carrying. I just wanted to say that. We get it now. I felt a shift in the air, like a door had opened just a crack. Thanks, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I appreciate that. She went on, more nervous now. Look, we'd like to have you over for dinner sometime, if you're open to it. Just us. No pressure. No drama. Just a quiet night with the kids. We miss having you around. I let her words sink in, feeling something warm stir in my chest. I hadn't expected this. Didn't know what to make of it at first, but I knew Emma missed me. And maybe, just maybe, there was a part of me that missed them too, even with everything that had happened. I'd like that, I said finally. It's been a while. Jennifer sighed, relieved. Good. We'll set it up then. No rush. Whenever you're ready. We talked for a few more minutes, setting a tentative date, but I didn't need any more words. The invitation alone felt like a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. Not everything was fixed, but it didn't need to be. Some things took time, and maybe, just maybe, I could start rebuilding a little, slowly, on my own terms. As we hung up, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not for some perfect family reunion, but for something simpler, something real. Not everything was going to be okay, but that was okay. I didn't need it to be, not anymore.